Hello, Reese from the Point Music Podcast thingy with another musical podcast ready for your ears. This one was amazing. I had so much fun. I had the absolute pleasure of chatting to Kav Temperley, he of Eskimo Joe fame and also based in Birds, but he has just released his second solo album, Machines of Love and Grace, which is incredible. It's got this. His voice is so distinct and it's so eclectic, and it's got so much stuff in it from like all these influences drawn in, and guests like John Butler and Katie Steele. Look, just go stream the damn album because it's amazing. We dive into all sorts of geeky stuff as well, so I really do hope you enjoy this one, ladies and gentlemen, and people of all sorts. This is Kav Temperley, and we're rolling. Kav Temperley. Congrats on it was today. Today you released your sophomore album, Machines of Love and Grace, and I've been spinning this, man. I'll be the first to say that I actually didn't listen to your first solo album, and I feel guilty about doing that. But this one is mint. I've it's hit me in certain ways. We'll get to, but how's it feel letting that go?
Feels really good. It's a huge cathartic experience when you work on something for a really long time. In
Mm.
fact, anyone who makes records will tell you it doesn't matter how many records you've made, but you seem to forget every time you go into making a record how much actual work is involved.
Yep.
And then you get to these beautiful moments like today where the record's actually out and you get to kind of just you forget all about that and just you press play on the record and just listen to the record, and that's all we want to achieve. We're just all trying to make an album that we would want to listen to, and that's what I've tried to do this time around.
So you spent 2.5 years, is basically since like all the shit hit the fan, really doing this because you got a studio at home, right? And you're basically doing it.
Yeah, well, I've actually got a studio in Fremantle, which is usually where I would be broadcasting these kinds of chats from, but
Right.
it's but I share that space with a bunch of other guys, and it's a really cool space in Fremantle called Art Source, where there's um, all kinds of artists of different disciplines, and we just happen to have the resident recording studio in there. So most of the record was recorded in that little studio, and by necessity, I had to do all the recording and play most of the instruments because I literally was not allowed anybody else in the room. So
Yeah.
um, and we were just before we pressed record, we were talking about how I've previously done another solo record, and
Mm.
that record was I had done an EP before, but it was my first proper solo album, and I spent a lot of that record. Well, I would say 80% of it was thinking about the drum sound that I wanted, and then the other 20% was like, who am I outside of Eskimo Joe as a solo artist? So this time round, I was literally just making music, not overthinking what type of record I was trying to make, but
Yeah.
really digging in more to the storytelling aspect of it. I love storytelling, and I just really wanted to write a record that read like my favorite, post-apocalyptic novels from, people who I love to read, like Margaret Atwood and Haruki Murakami and Kazuo Ishiguro, like who did Clara and the Sun recently.
Mm.
They all do these kinds of very beautiful post. They're like you don't even realize you're reading a post-apocalyptic book because there's this deeper emotional level to it. But that's what I wanted to do with my album, and I ended up writing this album that was a kind of post-apocalyptic true story about the last 2.5 years that we've just been through.
Yeah. That's one of the things I wanted to bring up with you is going and doing a solo project. You're sort of not restrained by other band members, and I know your band members Joel and Stuart that they both producers in their own right and brilliant producers too. I've heard Joel's stuff, like people from
Mm.
the Sunshine Coast have used Joel for their recordings, and it's great stuff. And I didn't know that you actually did that too. So hearing your album, and there was one thing that tied the whole thing together because it's so eclectic, and I love things that take you on a wild journey where you don't know what the next song is going to sound like you're expecting it to be like this, but the one thing tying it all together is your vocal delivery, because it's your vocal is such a unique thing. It's instantly recognizable in Australian music. I don't know if you realize that, but like as soon as I As soon
not
as I
really,
hear it,
but
like I just go, oh, that's got to be Cav, or that's got to be Eskimo Joe. Like, even Basement Birds, man, like, which I loved. Um, and that's why I really dug about this album. So, how's it feel not being restrained like that? I mean, you've got sax that you can chuck in there, which you've done that
yeah,
like in the interlude and the intro, and you've got
yeah.
like violins sweeping in, and you got like different ways of recording acoustic guitar. I mean, you don't have those restraints, so it must feel good.
Yeah, look, I think I felt much more comfortable in the skin of just a solo artist. And
Mm,
to tell you the truth, when I sit down to write a bunch of songs, I don't think, oh, okay, I'm writing a solo album or I'm going to write an Eskimo Joe album. I literally, when things start off, it's like it's just pure creation. You're just writing ideas down because you feel like that's just what I do. I have to do it on a regular basis. And this time round, I started off the record thinking maybe I was going to write an Eskimo Joe record
mm,
because we've just done some Eskimo Joe songs. But I very quickly realized that I was making a Cav record because that's how the stars aligned. And in that moment, as I started to kind of put everything together, I was like, again, I spent less time analyzing what kind of record I was making and more time just running from the computer to the piano just in time to be able to play the piano because there was no one else that I could say, hey, can you come in and play piano? Because we literally weren't allowed anybody else in the room.
mm,
So most of the decision making process was about, does this sound good? Okay, yes, it does. Brilliant. Let's move on. I spent less time going, what kind of piano sound do I want to record? I was literally just going, cool, that's sounding pretty good to me. Let's get on to the next thing. And so, what evolved out of that was this really kind of limited palette of things that I could actually use and do
mm.
because I was limited by my abilities as a musician. I couldn't, I did get to bring some musicians later in with the saxophone and strings and drums. I didn't play any of the drums on the record. But I was limited by literally what was right in front of me. And in that became this ultimate freedom came out because I just knew what like I couldn't go, well, I'm going to fly to LA and I'm going to write with this guy and I'm going
Yeah,
to put this drummer, who played on Beck's record on the album. Like I literally had to go, what can I see in front of me? Okay, cool. That is going to be the record. And I almost think it's a better way to do it
mm,
because you spend less time in these endless possibilities and you just do what sounds good. You dig into your favorite to your sensibilities and you're like, I like distortion on that. Brilliant.
yep.
Cool. Next track. You know what I mean? It's like you less time thinking about it and again more time just kind of thinking about, what's the story that I'm trying to tell.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this sound also. I mean, you can disagree with me what you want, but there's a lot of heavy '80s and '90s sort of influence coming through there, particularly Australian sounds. Like my favorite track on this album is Homesickness.
Oh, cool.
And the reason being, like, you've got Siobhan Cochin on there doing backing vocals, right? Because I had to, her stuff has been sent through to me as well. I didn't realize, oh shit, there's the connection, right? It
Yeah.
reminds me of Euroglider's Heaven mixed
Oh,
with
100%. You,
Eurythmics.
you nailed it.
Yay!
Yeah, well, I'm a huge Eurythmics fan.
Yeah.
I grew up, in my formative years listening to Eurythmics,
Yep.
and yeah, I was kind of trying to lay into that kind of that Australiana version of Eurythmics, which
This
for
is
me are bands like the
Eurogliders.
Eurogliders and stuff.
Yep.
And it's just like, really kind of straightforward vocals with the snare going and the chugging guitar.
That
Like
delay
these are
on the
sounds,
snare was so Eurythmics,
yeah,
man. I
yeah,
dug that.
totally. Yeah, but I wasn't, everything they do, like I love early 70s sounds as well.
Yeah.
But I grew up in the 90s, like learning how to write songs. So that's always kind of right there for me. But all of these sounds are kind of there in your subconscious waiting to come out.
Yep.
And I think the best way that it comes out is that if you just create songs to the best of your abilities, and you can hear the references, but it always sounds like music that's made for right now as opposed to trying to do this retro thing, which I
Mm.
definitely wasn't trying to do. But I was, not being embarrassed about any influences. I was just letting them kind of come out as they came out.
Yeah, well, we're basically the same age. I think you're a year older than me, practically. So we grew
There
up
you go.
listening
Yeah.
to the same sort of stuff. So as soon as you said
So all
Eurythmics,
those, all those formative years of like, the grunge scene coming up was was kind of my
Yep.
era of, when I first started to write songs. But in saying that, what informed it was that kind of decade beforehand, like,
Exactly.
Eurythmics, even shit like Run DMC, and all of those kinds of like hip hop acts that came up during the mid 80s were a
Mm.
huge influence.
Oh, NXS influences me still to this day, man, because I was big growing. Kick was one of my favorite albums, and because my sister used to
Yeah,
play it all the time, and it
yeah,
sort of just
right.
seeped into this subconscious. I did an album during the same period that you'd been doing. It. Mine still hasn't finished getting mastered yet. I've still got 4 more tracks to go, but
Well done. It takes a lot of work to get to that place where you make those final decisions and go, it is finished. I'm sending it off to the master.
great
So,
grey
bravo.
hairs, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Fucking hated that. Now, the one that I've been instructed to talk about, but I have great pleasure in talking about as well, is Defense.
Mm.
Now, it didn't grab me straight away, and I don't know why. But then when I listened to it more and more, and I'm not a lyrics person. I'm a bass player, so like I listen to the. I know.
They are the cool guys in the band.
Exactly, man. We're the most talented. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But then, like, knowing that John Butler was on this with you and listening to the swapping in lyrics and that, for some reason, I have the feeling that this is one of the first songs you actually wrote.
No, it
No?
wasn't. But it started out life as a John Butler song because I had
Ah.
co-written with John for his record Home,
Mm-hmm.
a song called "We Want More," which was like the closing track on the record. And and so me and John keep in contact, and we have these very kind of niche jobs where we're both artists from Western Australia who
Yeah.
work as professional musicians, who have families, so we have conversations about a very niche thing that we do, and that's quite refreshing. So I try and catch up with him whenever I can, and he lives down south of Perth, where I live, and in a really cool house. And I was just happened to be passing through Margaret River where he lives, and I just said, "Oh, hey man, how about I drop past and we'll write a song?" And so we started writing this song, and it evolved out of conversations we were having about where our heads were at, the normal kind of stuff, but under the intense pressure of this kind of COVID situation. I
Yeah.
mean, COVID started and we had just come out of like bushfires and floods, and all that environmental stuff is still there, but we were having to make these same decisions under pressure of a global pandemic, and it was just intense. And then on top of all of that, we're professional musicians who were like a endangered species at the time. So we were like, we're having these kind of, these conversations about shit, where our heads at, how are we going to survive this? And we also were talking a lot about, the anti-vax movement, which was like a big thing through that
Mm.
whole period. And that conversation evolved into this song called "Defense," and yeah, the whole point of it was that basically, there's no room to sit on the fence. Whatever happens, you've got to fucking make a decision right now,
Yeah.
and that's just where we are in the world. And so we finished the demo, and John actually sung all the vocals on it that day. But then I took it home, and I think I had like maybe like a jazz cigarette one night, and I was like, dude, do you know what we should do? And I was like, how about we turn it into a duet where it's kind of like a question answer thing? And he was like, yeah, 100%. That sounds great. So we kind of got to work in, you know, like suddenly the phrasing changed because the way I sing is like very on the groove, where
Yeah.
he's like very behind the groove. So it was interesting. This conversation, musically started to happen. And John's such a gun musician, so
Yeah.
like it was just great having him as a musician on the track. But you can hear probably the reason why it stands out a little bit as a bit of a slightly different song on the record is, yeah, we first started it as a John Butler song, and
Mm.
then ended up as a Kav song, and then I guess the the long term idea is that he then does a version of it on his record, but we
You
swap the
flip
vocals
it.
over.
That's cool.
Mm.
So was it him doing the guitar solo too? Because that was a pretty distinguishable.
Yeah,
Yeah, it sounded
yeah.
like a
So all the
guitar
really
style.
Yeah, so all the very neat kind of Cav Esky stuff, which is all of these kind of very melodic riffs, which is kind of how I play. That's me, and then all of the like
Yeah,
that's all John.
that's a
Yeah,
very John Butler thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah, it took me a little while, and then like the line, the flat earther line got me, it floored me, and then the other
yeah.
one I really like is the frog in the pot, which is a great line because not a lot of people wouldn't actually get that reference. And I was just like, okay, yep, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, slowly boiling
That's
in.
definitely a reference if you grew up in the beginning of the environmental scares.
Yep.
And they would always, do you remember those specials they used to have on like, commercial television? And it was just like, these very salacious, like, environmental crisis. And there were these huge specials, and they were like in the late 80s, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
And they always talked about the frog in the pot
Yep.
every single time.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I do remember those. Um, Also teaming up with Katie Steele in Graduation Day, which was a previous single as well. Which is,
Mm.
I think I can't remember. I think I put it on the playlist or something like that. But yeah, another very recognizable voice straight off the bat. So
Yeah.
obviously you know Katie as well, and have done for
Yeah.
some
So
time.
me and Katie have been friends for a very long time,
Yeah.
and we had a studio in Fremantle in like a kind of very early days of when bands were first starting to kind of stay in Perth. And
Mm,
so we were like the only band in our group of friends who had a recording setup. So we had a shed, we had like a first version of Pro Tools with a 001 card. And, so all of our friends would drop past and do their demos there. And this kind of production crew grew out of that, which has turned into what Joel does with his production. And another friend of ours, Andy Lawson, took the name. We called it Debaser Studios, and he took the name, and that's who I did the Bass and Birds record with.
all right.
But anyway, we were all hanging out, helping each other with each other's demos. And Katie was actually accompanying me as I would play a lot of the songs that I was writing for the album, The Song as a City, which was the record I was working on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So she'd come and I'd play, and she'd do harmonies and play a bit of piano. And I was trying to convince the rest of the guys in the band. I was like, she's amazing. And she was our mate Luke's little sister, Luke from Sleepies and Empire of the Sun
Yep.
fame. And so I was like, Katie's amazing. She should play keyboards in Eskimo Joe. We've got like so much piano on this next record. And the guy's like, oh, maybe. And then at a certain point in time, Katie played us her songs that she'd been writing. And we were just floored because they were so good. And we were like, don't, whatever you do, don't join our band. And so Joel and Andy sat down and helped her demo these with some other friends, and that turned into the band Little Birdie. So we have and then Little Birdie supported us at Eskies for years, and
Yeah.
Katie had been off around the world doing all kinds of things, but then has finally moved back to Perth and having babies and working on music again. So we've been communicating, talking about, again, where our heads are at, being solo artists, how does it all work, just trying to give each other advice in hard moments. And eventually I was like, what are you doing, Katie? Do you want to come over for a jam? And she came over and helped me finish off the song Graduation Day. And
Mm.
I knew I wanted to do a song with Katie. I didn't know whether it was going to be Homesickness or Graduation Day. But it was so amazing getting her in front of the microphone again, because I've known her for so long and I've known her voice so well.
Yeah.
It's such a distinct voice, but it's gotten so much better as well. Like she's singing better than she's ever sung, which is super cool.
See, at first I thought it was Katie singing on Homesickness, but then I sort
Right.
of then listened to the timbre of the actual tone just a little bit, and I went, nah, it's not. It's someone else doing the vocals on this
Yeah.
because Katie's just got that something. I don't know what it is, but yeah, you definitely know when she's singing because yeah, I love. My wife loves Little Birdie. She loves Katie. So
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is like being a vocalist these days, like because I came up during those that early '90s to mid '90s super emotive kind of
mm,
singers. Like there's a lot of the singers these days have a much more even temperament in how they sing, and that's kind of much more the style of the time. But myself and Katie both come from this like super emotive, like every word is like super, overthought and emotional. And I remember having like a knee jerk reaction at some point in time when I thought that wasn't cool. But now I'm pretty at home with it.
yeah.
But I think Katie's vocals embodies it. Like she's so emotive with every word that she sings.
So what was the actual first song you laid down for this album?
Last of the Wine was the
Oh
first
wow,
one.
okay, that's a heavy
Um,
song.
that, that and Twin Flames kind of came about the same time. I think I completed Twin Flames first. Like that was one of those like sat down on the acoustic guitar and the whole thing just went blah, blah,
Mm,
straight out of me. But Twin Flames took a bit more tweaking. But really, we came back from myself and my wife had been doing this podcast series called Hat Jam, where we'd been traveling around the world to different people's jam rooms and playing this game called Hat Jam, where we pull names out of a hat,
Mm.
um, and we would write a song in real time. And that would be edited down to about a 45 to 50-minute episode. But the names kind of would give you like, so you'd have all these names in a hat and you'd pull one out and it'd
Yeah.
be like, oh, the Pixies, Here Comes Your Man. And
Yeah.
so you'd have to write a verse with the flavors of that. And then once you did that, you pull out a second name and then that had to be the chorus. And sometimes it's completely different. Like it'll be like James Brown Sex Machine. And then you have to write a chorus in that. And then you'd have to stitch them both together, and then that would become the song. And
Wow.
anyway, one of the final ones I did was with Ben Lee, where he basically got me to take magic mushrooms while I was hosting this podcast and trying to write a song with Ben Lee, who's a provocative fellow at the best of times.
How Joe
Anyway,
Rogan
so
of
that was
you.
fun. Yeah. Well, so we did it, we survived it, and we got back home, and a day later, the whole entire world shut down.
Mm.
And so, and at the same time, I came down with this mystery virus, there was no way to even test whether it was COVID or whatever. I just had to isolate in the bedroom away from the rest of the family
What was
because
it?
everyone we don't know. It was like a flu
Yeah. Okay.
slash possibly COVID. Who knows?
Mm.
So I had to isolate from the rest of the family. Everyone in the world was in lockdown, and eventually, as I started to kind of like feel a bit better, there was a piano in the room, and I just started to muck around. And yeah, that was one of the first. Last of the Wine was one of the first ideas that kind of came together.
Wow. That was a hell of a like a segue to go into that actually. That, I want to try that hat game though. That sounds pretty wicked. You just got to make sure you're surrounded by other musicians, otherwise it's not going to fucking work.
Yeah, well, you've got to do it with intent. Like there's
Mm.
got to be. I mean, have a listen to the podcast. It's called Hat Jam. It's out there. It's what I love about what I loved about doing that Hat Jam podcast, which I would love to do again. But the way that the world has worked, it's just been
Mm.
the universe has said no, you can't travel anywhere, so that's fine. But what I loved about it is that so many songwriting tips, like gold songwriting tips, and kind of cool educational moments came up during that podcast when we were in the middle of talking about this stupid game that we were playing. So there's people like Josh Pike and Kevin Mitchell from I both did Bass and Birds with,
Yep.
and then there's Sarah McLeod and Ben Lee and another artist called Timothy Nelson from Perth and Dallas Frasca.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've named everyone. Anyway, um, when you're in the middle of this conversation of this, like, how do we write a song? No, everyone's distracted. Everyone's looking at this thing over here. And, that I think and they all say the same thing as we're talking about it. Like, how do you write a song? They all say the best songwriting comes when they're not staring directly at something.
Yeah. Shower.
So yeah, yeah,
It's just it.
yeah.
It's or sitting on the toilet or driving home from somewhere, anywhere where you're not within reach of an instrument or a recording device to actually write down the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this kind of idea that when you're doing a menial task is when the best stuff comes out.
Mm.
So that kind of happens during the podcast. Anyway, yeah.
You ever dream of a song and you wake up and you just go, I got to write that song down, and it doesn't sound like how it said in the dream, even though it sounds like epic.
I dream of songs all the time, and
Yeah.
they're like quite orchestral, like all the parts are there. And then my brain starts to play tricks with me as I wake up. They're like, "You'll remember this in the morning. You'll
Yeah.
be fine." And then you wake up in the morning, you're like, "What was that idea
Yeah.
again?" So sometimes if I'm like conscious enough, I'll make sure I just record it into my phone by the side of the bed, and that's usually the best result.
Yeah. I think Chet Faker actually did that when he wrote Gold.
Right.
He was dreaming of the bass line to Rock On. Doom, doom,
Right.
doom. Yeah, and then he actually sleepily he recorded that, and then it came out to that in yeah Gold. So there you go.
I love the Keith Richards story, which is that back in the day before we had iPhones to just press and digitally save these things, he had like one of those old school reel to reel tape decks
Yep,
by the side of his bed, and he woke up with the riff to Satisfaction in his head,
I know that
and
story.
then
Yeah.
yeah, he gets up and he plays it, and he falls back asleep again, and he wakes up, and the next morning he's just like, oh shit, is it there? Like, was that a dream? And he presses play and it's there, but then he's forgot to press stop. So it's like an hour of him just snoring.
Oh man. Now I'm gonna ask very quickly a guilty pleasure thing. I mean, because bass player to bass player,
Hmm.
why choose the Starbase, the Warwick Starbase? Because it's a semi hollow and it's a bit of a weird choice of a bass to play. Like normally touring musicians would, because I can't imagine it being an easy bass to tour with.
Look, the Starbase came to me in this bizarre moment because I was playing. I'd always played the Music Man
Yeah.
and the stereo basses, and it was such a solid bass, like never went out of tune. You could lay into it. It really worked with the sound of our band at the time, especially during the Black Fingernails period.
Mm.
Um, but we started touring Germany quite extensively, like, and it was great. We loved it. Really good fan base over there. And at a certain point in time, Warwick, who were a German company,
Yep.
like came to us and said, "Hey, do you want to? We've just started remaking the old Framus guitars because they were originally a company called
Yeah.
Framus, and one of their big guitars was this Starbase, right? So they made the Starbase 2, and the first one that I got was their kind of like first off the cab off the rank. So they tried to make it as good as possible, and in my mind, I always thought that Warwick were played by bass players in
Metalheads.
like monster bands. They had to be like down like
John
that.
Stockman for
Um,
Carnival, basically, man.
yeah,
Like the six string.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Who's an amazing bass player.
He
Like,
is.
don't get me wrong. But anyway, I got it and I started playing it, and I didn't jump to it straight away because I was so like, oh, I've got my bass. I don't need any basses. So it became like the extra bass that I played. But then somewhere along the line, I started to plug it in and just compare them, and it's just got this perfect. It play. You can have it under a big rock and roll band. It
Mm.
sits really, it's a really solid sounding bass, but at the same time, it's got just the right amount of plonky character in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of get that little bit of the hollow body plonk, but it's by no means sounding like a hollow body instrument. And so I ended up, so I was like, okay, I love this bass now. And I started playing it on the records, and it was heaps more versatile, heaps more character. And the neck is great.
Wow.
It's like the best neck I've ever played. Like, and I always had a problem with the Warwick headstocks as well. Like
The big
it's
beefy
funny
ones.
how you get, yeah, it's all a little bit like, it was just a bit daggy, and I was like, but they used the same headstock on all their bases and the same necks on all their bases. So I was like, wow, this is actually a really, really good bass to play, and it's really playable. And then I ordered a second star bass because I was like, well, I think I'm just going to use this now. And that was like the same amount of money, maybe a couple of years later, still not as good an instrument as that white bass, that first one that I've got.
Yep.
So maybe I just fluked it and just got a great instrument. I don't know, but it's
That's the
served
rare
me well.
thing with basses, man. Like I don't know if you can see behind me that way,
Yes, I
that way.
can. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So like I got four, yeah, four there, and I've still got my original bass that I got when I was 14 years old, and it's a Kenora from a weird place in Canada that was made using parts from all over Japan, and it's got one of those one-off tones. I can't plan.
Yeah.
It's a short scale and it sounds huge.
And so usually short scale basses are a nightmare because you can't kind of lay into them. You got to play them almost like a guitar.
Yeah. Well, that's why, because I actually have the band that I was recording an album for. I split the signal, so I'm basically playing the bass like a guitar.
There you
So,
go.
so doing the whole royal blood
Well,
thing.
not. Oh yeah, cool. So not to get too nerdy because there's only about this many people of your listening public who are probably interested. But so when I was doing the record, I did a lot of. I had like three basses going basically,
Yeah.
basically.
Haha.
So I had there's a great plugin called Sublab, and I kind of got my. You can create your own sounds on it, but I got my own sound. So every single song, when the chorus kicks in, the Sublab kicks in, and it's got this nice just underlying sub going on. If there's character parts going on, I've got like a 69 Hofner,
Oh.
like beat bass,
Yep.
and so I kind of use that a little bit in bits and pieces. And then when I want that in between, not quite the sub and not the full character, then I've got the star bass playing the rest of it. So
Nice.
most of the songs have got three basses on it, and only someone like you would appreciate it because most people, if I tell that to them, they'll glaze over in
Yeah,
about
they're
two
already
seconds.
asleep. They're already thinking about something else. Yeah, no. It's like playing a
Exactly, but
bass
I'm like,
solo.
I'm like, so the song starts, right? And there's this character bass. That's on the Hofner. But then when, you need to drive it,
Like
Starbase kicks in. Then the
you're
chorus happens. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's my bass nerd talk.
That's plenty. That's probably plenty of bass nerd talk from the both of us.
Yeah.
We've got very little time left, but I do want to bring up the whole subject of NFTs.
Yes, absolutely.
So, explain what you're. Well, can you explain what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I'll explain it from like an art connected to the record outwards, if that
Because
makes
just so you know, we've got
any
about
better.
5 minutes.
Yep, I can see that.
Yep.
So basically, with my record, I met these guys from this place called Ocean Floor Music, who are a
Hmm.
DAO. I won't go into any of that, but what I ended up doing is creating a bunch of NFTs that drop on November the 22nd, called it's called Love in the Key of A B C D E F G,
Hmm.
and I've written a song and then rewritten it and re-recorded it in the seven different keys of A B C D E F G.
Right.
And, and then I've worked with the guy who I did the artwork for my record with. And together we've created these kind of animating playing cards. So each key looks like a playing card, and it's in A, B, C, D, G, or whatever.
Yep.
And so you get each one, you get this original song. It's like if you think about it in the terms of it being a digital collectible,
Hmm.
and so for me, it's like this. It's got a total linear line to the record that I've just made. The artwork is kind of similar. The songs were written at the same time. But the cool thing is you have to buy one of these NFTs to hear this song. It's not going to exist on a Spotify playlist or anything,
Right.
and you'll own it as in your own little thing that you can have on your phone or a digital screen or whatever. Um, they look amazing. They look like a piece of art, which I love. So whatever happens with the technology, whether it's the savior of mankind or not, I don't really care. What I love about it is that it's this extension of the artwork that I've done for the record. And people who are Eskimo Joe fans will be able to come in and buy them. And I think that's a way cooler way to consume a B-side
Mm.
than to put it out for free on Spotify and get $0 when people stream it a couple of times. Like there is a small percentage of your fans who are going to want to buy these because they love what you do. And I guess the dream would be is that enough people buy these NFTs that the money made from that funds whatever the next record is I want to make.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue the theme. Like I'll probably do it twice a year, and it'll be something or rather in the key of A B C D E F G, and I'll just keep doing that as a theme. But again, I love how they look. So we're going to do a launch at this place called Oshi Gallery in Melbourne. It's the first NFT gallery in Australia,
Wow.
and that'll be presented by Ocean Floor Music, who are minting the NFTs. And I'll do a bit of a performance, and then we'll put them out there. And the idea is that Eskimo Joe fans can come in, Kav Temperley fans can come in, and then people who are just investors in the NFT world. And for those people who don't know what NFTs are, they're like think about stocks and shares, but with art
Art.
attached to them.
Mm.
So you buy this thing, it's attached to a cryptocurrency like ETH,
Heath.
is
Mm.
what this will be attached to. And you can have that. You can sell it. The cool thing is because it's attached to this thing called the blockchain. It's got this contract in it, so it'll always know who the person who made it is, and every time they sell it, the original creator will get 10% of that sale, and that's kind of cool in itself. So we could go down a deeper rabbit hole of what NFTs are and what the whole Web3 world is, but I think for the purpose of the end of this conversation, it's like it's just a really great way for artists and musicians. It's a very new world for music,
Mm.
to somewhere to put their B-sides, somewhere to put that extension of the record that they've made, and just create cool art that people can actually own, which I think is amazing.
It's kind of like the new form of the collectible vinyls where they came out in different formats, like the different
100%.
gatefolds and the different splatters and that sort of stuff.
It's that, but for the modern world,
Yeah.
because we all live in this digital world. Like there is no one from your grandma to your child who doesn't know how to use an iPad. So it's like
Mm.
it's just where we live now.
Wow, Cav, man, we went down the full nerdy route there from bass player nerds
Yes,
to NFTs and all sorts of
nerds,
stuff.
NFT, bass sound, bring it on.
Nailed it, man. I'll wrap up things now because we've gone to the half-hour mark, and I try to keep things that
Yeah,
quick for you. Stay on the line. I'll have a quick debrief with you. But for everyone else, do check out Machines of Love and Grace. There's an amazing album, Cav. Well done on that. And
Thanks, Reed.
you're
Appreciate it.
very welcome, man. Everyone else, adios. I hope you enjoyed that one because I sure as shit did. Big thank you to Cav for jumping on with that one, and thank you for indulging my nerdiness, particularly about bass talk. And to the other bass players that might listen to, all like 3 of you probably, I hope you dug that too and picked up a few things. More podcasts coming. I've booking them up, so strap in and get ready for this new wave of podcasts from The Point. Thank you for supporting live music, local music, Australian music, all sorts of music. You guys are legends. Cheers.